welcome the distinguished chairman of the Finance Committee and yield to him for his questioning.
Well, I thank the chairman, and I see also Senator Johnson and my colleagues here who've done very important work on these kinds of issues. I also want to recognize that in the House is my old neighbor, Kim Klossing from Southeast Portland. We got to lure her back, and we so appreciate her, being here. Look, what we're trying to do is use this year to the greatest extent possible for helping people and then to tee up 2025. For example, and Senator Whitehouse knows this in particular because, he is so knowledgeable about the budget, and as we try to, work through these issues, is that we are looking at a 3-year bill. So there will be an opportunity. For example, I very much like the small business provision, the expensing provision, which is getting no coverage, and every progressive small business group likes that. And we're going to be doing that for 3 years. And I very much like the fact that we are embarking on a pro-family policy, because right now, these families, and my understanding is about 70% of the eligible families have more than one child, but they really only get credit for one child for purposes of the reimbursement policy. So when Chairman Whitehouse and I talk about this stuff, you hit yourself in the head and say, how in the world does that make sense? So what we're trying to do is to help people now, but to do smart things that tee everything up for 2025. Ms. Klossing, you've been working in these tax precincts for a long time. What do you see as the key priorities for us going into the 2025 debate? And as you know, you don't have to go into a lot with billionaires for the chairman and I, because we've introduced the billionaire legislation. And Senator Johnson, by the way, has talked to me about this over the years. So if he wants to make a billionaire income tax bipartisan bill, I'm all in. But tell us what you think are the priorities for 2025.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, for that question and for your leadership in this area. 2025, as you know, is such an important year for tax policy. And as I mentioned earlier, the price tag for a carte blanche extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is $4 trillion if you include the business provisions that are already starting to bite. So I think my first priority for 2025 would be that we have to take serious deficit reduction and not just simply extend a series of prior tax cuts that aren't necessarily working well. A second point is that I think we need to make progressive changes in our tax system. I think the child tax credit improvements that you're suggesting in the legislation under consideration right now are a nice step in the right direction. I think we can afford to be even more generous with children and with the earned income tax credit while collecting more from those at the top who can really afford it. A third principle is efficiency. I think that we didn't get a lot of bang for the buck in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in terms of how much revenue we lost relative to how much investment and other useful things we encouraged. And there's some things like the R&D provisions that are actually discouraging benefits to greater society from research and development if we're having to amortize rather than expense that. And then finally, a fourth consideration that I think is really near and dear to my heart and to your work and to Senator Whitehouse's work is ensuring that the U.S. can work with partner countries abroad to address some of these global collective action problems. And both climate change and international tax competition are places where U.S. policy could better align with good policy and with what other countries are doing to solve those problems.
I'm almost out of my time, and I just want to have you, because you are so expert. The billionaire policy now is really built on 3 words, really ending buy, borrow, and die, which is the 3-word formula that allows billionaires to go for years on end, years and years, paying little or nothing in taxes. I heard you say something about efficiency and revenue. Colleagues, the revenue estimate for eliminating effectively buy, borrow, and die is, by Joint Committee on Taxation, $550 billion over 10 years. Is there anything that raises more money from 900 billionaires? Colleagues, 900 billionaires, $550 billion, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, by effectively ending buy, borrow, and die. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that is probably the most you're going to get from that population is through that legislation. I think there are other things in the tax code that raise a lot of revenue, and the corporate increases that I was talking about earlier could bring in about $1.5 trillion if you cut the offshoring and profit shifting incentives and increase the corporate rate. But I think looking at ways in which people avoid defer taxation on their capital income is a really important complement to that.
Thank you, my colleagues, for all the extra time. Thank you for your good work, Mr. Chairman. Senator Johnson, look forward to working with you on this.